close enough to the 1,750-word target while staying strictly within the original facts. On July 29, 1958, 68 years ago today, a stroke of Dwight Eisenhower's pen created an agency with no rockets, no spacecraft, and barely any staff, and gave it 11 years to put a man on the moon. No fleet of engineers standing by, no launch pads waiting, no spacecraft on a drawing board, just a signature, a piece of legislation, and an almost unbelievable ambition. Somehow it worked. Let's rewind to understand why this moment mattered so much. It's October 4th, 1957. Americans turn on their radios and hear a strange, steady beeping falling from the sky, faint but unmistakable, drifting in on shortwave frequencies in homes across the country. That sound is coming from Sputnik 1, a beach ball-sized satellite the Soviet Union has just launched into orbit, the first man-made object ever to circle the Earth. It's not a weapon. It's not even that big, smaller than a beach ball, really, with a few spindly antennas trailing behind it. But it changes everything. Overnight, the country realizes the Soviets can put something over American skies whenever they want, and the United States has nothing up there to match it. People step outside at dusk just to try to catch a glimpse of it passing overhead, a small dot of light carrying an outsized message, a reminder visible to the naked eye that the sky above them no longer belongs to them alone. Then, less than a month later, it gets worse. On November 3rd, the Soviets launched Sputnik 2, this time carrying a passenger, a dog named Laika. Now it's not just about satellites. It's about living creatures in space. The message lands hard. Whoever masters space might master the future, and right now America is behind. The pressure is enormous. Newspapers call it a crisis. Congress holds hearings, and the country scrambles to answer back. On January 31st, 1958, the U.S. finally gets its own satellite into orbit, Explorer 1, built with the Army and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, riding a rocket designed by a team led by Wernher von Braun. Explorer 1 isn't just a symbolic win. It actually makes a real scientific discovery, detecting bands of radiation circling the Earth, later named the Van Allen belts after the scientist who led the instrument team, James Van Allen. It's proof that the first American satellite isn't just catching up for pride's sake. It's doing real science the moment it reaches orbit. So America is back in the game. But here's the problem. The effort is scattered. The Army has rockets. The Navy has rockets. The Air Force has rockets. Nobody is in charge of space as a whole, and each branch is essentially running its own separate, competing program with little coordination between them. That's where the story really begins, because the tools to fix this fractured effort already exist. They're just sitting in the wrong shape. For more than 4 decades, the U.S. has had a quiet, unglamorous research agency called NACA, the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics, founded back in 1915. NACA doesn't build rockets or launch anything. It runs wind tunnels. It studies airflow over airplane wings. Its engineers are brilliant, meticulous, and almost entirely unknown to the public, working out of research centers like Langley in Virginia, quietly refining the science of flight for generation after generation of aircraft. NACA is the perfect skeleton for something bigger. It just needs a new mission, new legal authority, and a much bigger ambition. So Eisenhower's administration and Congress move fast. They draft the National Aeronautics and Space Act, and on July 29, 1958, Eisenhower signs it into law. It's a huge legal decision, and notice how deliberate the wording is: Aeronautics and Space. This new agency isn't just about rockets. It inherits NACA's entire mission of flight research and adds the cosmos on top of it, treating the sky and the space beyond it as one continuous frontier rather than 2 separate problems. The act doesn't just create a name on paper. It formally dissolves NACA and folds its people, its labs, and its decades of aerodynamic research directly into a brand new civilian agency, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. And here's the detail that makes this so remarkable. NASA doesn't start hiring from zero. It opens for business on October 1st, 1958, inheriting NACA existing research centers and thousands of engineers and scientists who, just weeks earlier, had been studying wing shapes and had never worked on a space mission in their lives. Almost overnight, wind tunnel researchers become space program pioneers, taking the same rigorous engineering discipline they'd applied to airplane wings and pointing it instead at the vacuum of space. Eisenhower makes a deliberate choice here that's easy to overlook. He insists NASA be a civilian agency, not a military one. Even though the Cold War is the reason it exists, he wants America's space program to stand for open, peaceful exploration, not a branch of the arms race, at least not in name. It's a subtle but important distinction, one that shapes how the agency presents itself to the world and to its own people from its very first day. The first NASA administrator, Keith Glennon, is even sworn in that same first day, October 1st, 1958, tasked with turning this repurposed research bureau into something that can compete with a nation that already has a head start. So now NASA exists, but existing on paper is one thing, actually getting a human being into space is another, and the clock is already running because the Soviets aren't slowing down. The first order of business is deceptively simple to say and brutally hard to do. Put a person into space and bring them home alive. This becomes Project Mercury, and it moves at a sprint. In under 3 years, NASA designs a spacecraft, selects 7 military test pilots as the nation's first astronauts, and prepares for launch. On May 5, 1961, Alan Shepard rides a Mercury capsule on a short suborbital hop, becoming the first American in space, just weeks after Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin becomes the first human in space altogether. Less than a year later, on February 20th, 1962, John Glenn becomes the first American to orbit the Earth, circling the planet 3 times aboard Friendship 7, a flight that transfixes the whole country as it plays out, with families gathered around televisions to watch. And it's right in the middle of this stretch, just 20 days after Shepard's flight, that the mission gets its most audacious deadline yet. On May 25, 1961, President John F. Kennedy stands before Congress and commits the nation to landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to Earth before the decade is out. Remember, NASA is barely 3 years old at this point. It has one short suborbital flight under its belt, and now it's been asked to reach the moon within roughly 8 remaining years. It sounds almost reckless, but the agency treats it as a design problem to be solved in stages, one achievable milestone stacked carefully on top of the next. That's where Gemini comes in, the bridge between Mercury and the moon. Through 1965 and 1966, Gemini astronauts practice exactly the skills a lunar mission will demand, maneuvering one spacecraft to meet another in orbit, docking with it, and working outside the capsule in the vacuum of space. In June of 1965, astronaut Ed White steps out of his Gemini capsule and becomes the first American to walk in space, tethered to his craft while orbiting hundreds of miles above the Earth, floating against the black backdrop with the whole planet turning slowly beneath him. Every Gemini flight is essentially a rehearsal, one engineering puzzle at a time, for the far more complicated choreography the moon will require. Then comes Apollo, and it isn't a straight line to glory. In January of 1967, tragedy strikes during a routine ground test when a fire breaks out inside the Apollo 1 capsule, killing astronauts Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. It's a devastating loss, and it forces NASA to rebuild the spacecraft's design from the inside out, addressing serious safety flaws before ever putting another crew at risk. It's a sobering reminder that this entire endeavor is being invented in real time, with no guarantee of success and genuine lives on the line, and that every step toward the moon carries real risk alongside real ambition. But the program presses forward. Apollo 8 sends astronauts around the moon for the first time at the end of 1968. And then, on July 20th, 1969, Apollo 11 lands the lunar module Eagle on the moon's surface, and Neil Armstrong climbs down the ladder to become the first human being to set foot on another world. Just 11 years, almost to the week, after that agency was created from a small aeronautics research bureau with no astronauts, no moon rockets, and no roadmap. Think about the sheer scale of that transformation. In 1958, this organization's most advanced work involved airflow over airplane wings in a wind tunnel. By 1969, its engineers had designed a machine capable of carrying human beings 250,000 miles through the vacuum of space, landing them gently on another world, and bringing them home. That's not incremental progress. That's one of the most concentrated bursts of engineering achievement in human history, and it all traces back to a single signature on a single summer day. So today, on the anniversary of that signature, July 29th, it's worth pausing on just how improbable this all was. A shocked nation, a repurposed research agency, and a decade-long sprint that ended with footprints on the moon. NASA didn't start with rockets. It started with wind tunnels and a piece of paper. Everything else, it built along the way. If you found this story as wild as I do, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of America's incredible history where this came from.